Welcome to the Calder Farmstead.
Now the Ice Hawks back out to center in transition. Carlson with Quenneville 2-on-1. Right when Carlson comes, Quenneville scores.
Here's a chance for Barrett. Fighting scores! Off the face-off! Up it's Heminger. Pulled back to Werenski. Has it. Shoots one. Bounces off a man. 5 seconds left. Werenski. Another jam on the shot. Turning and firing. They go! Monsters score! Now they catch each other. They both go right over the top. Matching rights to one another. McDermott gets the helmet off of Cassie.
And now, with 9 minutes gone in overtime, the Bears breaking out right side with Bear. Looks like cutting to the net. Bear will score!
And here are your hosts, Cece and Sean.
And so we begin anew. My name is Cece Hawkley, and alongside my cohort and good friend Sean O'Brien, we'd like to welcome you to the Calder Farmstead, an AHL podcast right here on the Full Press Coverage Radio Network. Now, before we get started with episode 0, if you're not familiar with Sean and myself, we've been hosting an American League Hockey focused program for a little bit of time now, and albeit under a different name. We recently jumped to Full Press Hockey from another website and rebranded to a new show. And we figured it'd be a good opportunity to familiarize our new listeners rather, and refresh our continuing followers that have followed us over from said website. We wanted to refresh them on some of the things we referenced during our shows. So without any further delay, I'd like to turn it over, and I'll chime in as well, but we'll start off with my analytically inclined co-host to explain just what the hell we're talking about a good portion of the time when we're covering the AHL in our podcast medium. So everyone, Sean O'Brien.
Thank you, Cece.
You bet.
One of the things I wanted to say at the start here is a much smarter man than I, Mikey Stevens, had the quote that analytics are salad. You need both parts to understand hockey well, as you need both salad dressing and raw lettuce. If you just chug salad dressing, that's unusual and probably not very good for you. The same if you just eat raw greens. That's weird. You need both the eye test and analytics to be able to really understand what's happening on the ice. And that's something our show hopes to bring, is we bring both the analytic models that we're going to explain here, as well as, we watch the games and see what's going on and break those down for you guys as well. But you're probably more familiar with, watching the games as fans, but probably not as familiar with the analytics. Or if you are, this is a good refresher. So without giving away all the secret sauce or getting so technical that you're using this to fall asleep to, because trust me, I know, if you could bottle lectures on statistical inferences, it'd put Z-Quil and Ambien out of business. But we do need to talk about it. So a quick note about statistical models. They aren't perfect. In fact, all statistical models are wrong. Some models are useful. What I mean by that is that hockey is a game filled with randomness. It's a 5.5 ounce vulcanized rubber disc on ice that gets slapped around at Autobahn speeds. Weird stuff is going to happen. That randomness causes error to be built into not just hockey models, but football models, basketball models, public health models, economic models, etc. None perfectly capture what they're trying to model. Hence, all models are wrong.
Yeah, and just because there's an error that is inevitable rather in a model, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. The speedometer in your car isn't perfectly accurate. We've all had it go haywire at one time or another in a vehicle that we've driven. Does that mean that you should ignore it when you're passing a cop on the highway? Your oven doesn't measure the temperature inside with perfect accuracy. Should you just set it to whatever the next time you bake? Absolutely not.
And the model I use for the AHL isn't perfect, and I treat it as such. I treat it as being not perfect. Over the course of the podcast, I will absolutely have disagreements on how it rates players, teams, etc. It is, however, a very good baseline.
Yes, it is. For example, if I see my favorite team signed a player that I wasn't familiar with, and I go on Sean's Tableau page and see that the model called him an 88th percentile and a first line forward over 55 games in 2019, 2020, and that player had a similar outcome in 18-19, I can feel pretty confident that the team that I cover, the team that I follow, or, whatever, the team that signed that player has a very good player.
The individual model itself is called point shares. I didn't create it, improve it, popularize it. I just use it for one simple reason. Based on the data that's publicly available to me from the AHL, I can use it. It's not the most accurate model for statistically analyzing player performance. You'd have to talk to Michael Blake McCurdy, Don Lashusian, or Josh and Luke Youngren about that. Their models are fantastic, but require stats like shot location, time on ice, individual shot attempts, etc., all of which the AHL likely collects through Hockey Tech, but doesn't make public because reasons.
Yes, much to the chagrin of Sean, for sure. So what Point Shares does is try to boil down all of an individual player's value to his team's standings points. So if a theoretical player, John Smith, finishes the season with a 5.53 point share, that means his team gained 5.53 points in the standings because of his play on the ice.
From that point shares value, I break it down to per game, just dividing point shares by games played, and use that to determine the percentile ranks and depth chart value. I use 20 games as a cutoff point for inclusion for those skaters, but not goalies. Why 20 games? I'll admit it's somewhat of an arbitrary point. You can easily make the argument for 15 games, 25 games, etc. At 20 games, though, from looking over the data for a long time, small 3 and 4 game hot and cold streaks start to affect the overall per game number less and less. For the 2021 season, that 20 game cutoff will obviously change, as some teams will only play 24 games. I'm not sure at this time, though, what that cutoff is yet, but in previous years, 20 games has been that cutoff. So the reason I use per game for percentile ranks and depth chart value is also important. So let's say right wing A has 5.4 point shares compared to right wing B that has 5.2. Right wing A is clearly better. 5.4 is bigger than 5.2. Well, what if right wing A played 50 games and right wing B played 35? Suddenly that skews how we view it, and that isn't solely captured by point shares and just eyeballing the charts of who's further. I wanted to capture not just who's brought the most value to standings across the season, but the aspect as well as who's more valuable to any one game.
Now, that's a really good overview on skaters. And you did mention goalies and saying that, 20 games isn't exactly a good barometer to measure goalies because obviously they're going to play a different amount of games, with goaltenders going back and forth and, having an A and a B, tandem, as it were. What about goaltenders, Sean?
Well, first things first, we have to understand goaltending is voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
You will undoubtedly hear me say this a lot throughout our podcast. Why? Because goaltending, in short, is nearly impossible to predict. And that does make some sense when you think about it.
Right. Like, for example, the Iowa Wild, Kaapo Kähkönen was their netminder, and he won the Bastion Award for best goaltender in the AHL last season, which was 1920. Now, he finished with a .927 save percentage, and in theory, that means if you took 100 shots on Kähkönen, he stops about 93 of them and lets about 8 goals in. The Stockton Heat's John Gillis had a .907 save percentage last season. If he faced the same 100 shots, he'd let in 2 more goals than Kähkönen. 2 saves per 100 shots on goal is the difference between a top goaltender and a middling one. That is a very thin margin.
Not to mention, save percentage is not something that's stable. What that means is, across all goaltenders, last season's save percentage does not do a good job of predicting next season's save percentage. Colin Delia was second in save percentage in 18-19 among qualified starters, according to AHL.com. He was 16th in 19-20. Vitaly Vanacek was 23rd in 18-19 and 10th in 19-20. Max Legacy was 9th last season in save percentage and 14th in 18-19. Could he finish the 2021 season 20th? Sure. Could he finish 3rd? Absolutely. Would either surprise me? Not really. The point shares model also covers goalies and says the same basic things about them. Based on their play stopping pucks, how much did a goalie contribute to his team's points in the standings? You also see that the goalie maps are always per 60 minutes in total, and are per 60 minutes and not total. I did this because goaltending games played varies a lot, as you'll get A-B starters who split time equally. You'll get guys who get a little bit more favorable schedule, and we'll see, 50-something games in a regular season get played. And goalies earn more point shares than skaters each game. This means that the graph was much more skewed to okay-ish goalies with more games played than top goalies compared to what the players graph looked like.
Yeah, and point shares, that with all that you said, Sean, point shares per 60 minutes is only half the goalie's graph. The other half is goals saved above average per 60 minutes. So goals saved above average is basically a stat that takes save percentage and gives it a little more context. Say your goalie finishes the season with a .917 save percentage. Is that good? Without context of how good other goalies in the league are, it's tough to say. What goals saved above average does is it plops the statistical average goalie for your goaltender and lets your guy and it says your guy let in 72 goals. A league average goalie facing the same number of shots would have let in 85 goals. So your goalie saved 13 more goals than average. Hence, goals saved above average. This tells us how much better than a league average goalie our netminder was.
And like point shares per game, goals saved above average is shown per 60 minutes to make it so that games played doesn't skew the chart. So that pretty much covers the point shares model. There are a handful of other topics I'd like to talk about before we wrap up here. One is PDO. Contrary to what you'd probably think, PDO doesn't really stand for anything. As far as I can tell, it's the initials of the guy who created it, and his name is apparently lost to internet history. Regardless, PDO is a simple calculation. It's a team's shooting percentage plus a team's save percentage. Ideally, their PDO is taking only shooting and save percentage 5-on-5 and not including special teams, but the AHL doesn't provide shots by strength, even though they measure it, because reasons. And the process of pulling it apart from their game sheets is incredibly cumbersome at this time, so I instead estimate it based on some shot rates. So for now, you'll see two charts on the Tableau page. One that's all strengths and one that's estimated PDO 5v5. Now, what PDO is attempting to quantify is luck. On a long enough timeline, teams will hover around a PDO of about 100. Anything 1 point higher or lower than 100 is a sign that a team that has been lucky or unlucky, depending on which side of the scale you're on, and is more likely due for a reversal of that luck. That being said, very good and very bad teams can sustain PDOs that are 1 or 2 points away from 100 because of their talent level. But even those we would still expect to come back to earth at some point. Last season, Providence finished with an estimated PDO of 101, which isn't shocking as they were very, very good. I'd expect that to come down a bit, but I wouldn't expect them to fall off the map.
Right. So in contrast, Bakersfield finished with an estimated PDO of 98, which says to me, and anybody else paying attention to analytics, that in addition to being a bad team, they also probably got a little unlucky. Tucson finished with an estimated PDO of 102. Were they a good team? Very likely. Did they get some good puck luck along the way last season? Also very likely. The same could be said about Belleville, Utica, and Milwaukee. Good teams get lucky sometimes. Sometimes they get unlucky. Hershey finished the season with an estimated PDO of 99, which is scary because the idea that a team that was third in the league in points percentage maybe got a little unlucky over the course of the season and is due for some good luck as we were approaching the playoffs. That unfortunately did not happen.
PDO is almost like the canary in the coal mine. It should give you a warning that your team may have gotten some good puck luck or bad puck luck and isn't as good or as bad as they appear. As I said earlier, it's a game with a 5.5-ounce vulcanized rubber disc being slapped around at Autobahn speeds. Weird stuff is going to happen, and luck is going to have its say in some of those outcomes. One thing I want to talk about quick here too is plus minus. Plus minus is bad. I will repeat that. Plus minus is bad. It's a misleading stat at best and should 100% not be used to measure defensive ability. For starters, plus minus doesn't count all goals in its totals. Power play goals don't count, but shorthanded goals do. This means the guys who get power play time can only hurt their plus minus. Also, if you're on the ice while the goalie is pulled and a goal is scored on the empty net, that counts against your plus minus total. Or if you're on the ice and scored while the goalie is pulled and it's scored in your team with the goalie, that also counts against you. That's silly.
Yeah, and it also doesn't take into account ice time. So let's say Sean and I are identical hockey players in terms of ability, which could be farther from the truth because Sean has actually played the game and I haven't. But let's just say, hypothetically, Sean and I are identical hockey players. When on the ice, Our side controls 60% of the goals scored, meaning that we score 6 for every 4 goals the other team scores. Now, if I am a top line forward playing 19 minutes a night and Sean gets 9 minutes a night, I'm going to rack up a better plus minus than him because I'm on the ice for longer, even though we're identical players. You might say that coaches wouldn't play those guys the same minutes. That's probably true. But it also means that weaker players who get fewer minutes will have a better plus minus because they simply aren't on the ice and don't play on the power play. If you're a top AHL player on a team with a bunch of pylons, your plus minus will suffer because your teammates can't score or keep goals out of their own net.
Plus minus also treats responsibility for every goal scored and against equally for all players in the ice, which is absurd. A shot from center ice goes in. How are all 5 skaters equally responsible for that? If I'm creating traffic in front of the net in the offensive zone and the defenseman on the point bobbles the puck, an opposing player takes it off him, goes on a breakaway and scores, how was I, the net front guy, equally responsible for that goal just as the defenseman was? Is the passenger just as responsible for a car accident as the driver? No. Last up, we want to talk about 2 things that we're going to stress when we talk about games going forward into the season. First one is transition. Getting the puck out of your own end into the other team's end is important, obviously. However, the way you get the puck out and get the puck in matters. Chipping the puck off the glass and into the neutral zone, while yes, gets it out, maybe gets a line change, but it's really akin to punting in football. You're still giving up possession, but it's just not in the same prime real estate it once was. That being said, leaving the zone with possession is much better, as it also leads to entering the zone with the puck. Offensive zone entries with possession of the puck as opposed to dump and chase creates 60% more shots. Now, that doesn't mean you should never dump and chase or that dump and chase is bad. Some teams are built to be more effective at dump and chase, and that works for them. But like tequila, dumping and chasing should be used responsibly.
Most definitely. And transition is important too, as while only about 5% of shots come during rush chances, 18% of goals are scored off rush chances. So, you're generating a whole lot more of a scoring chance, even though, a significant less amount of shots are taken during those chances, meaning that creating those chances is important, and those being with winning the transition battle. So along with winning the transition battle, the shot location battle is also important. 2/3 of goals are scored from what's known as the home plate or the house area in front of the goal. So if you draw lines from the goalposts diagonally to the faceoff dots, and then up to the top of the circle and across, you make a home plate or a house shape. This is the area you want to be shooting pucks from, as shooting percentage goes up drastically as you get into this area. Teams that outshoot their opponents from inside home plate win 68% of the time. That's a little over 2/3% of the time. So it's pretty important to create shots from there and defend against them.
Well, that is it for episode 0.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys are enjoying the show, please make sure to subscribe so you get episodes in a timely fashion. Also, please rate and review the podcast wherever you are listening to it from. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like on the video and comment what you thought of the episode. Doing so helps others find the show, and your reviews help us improve it. You can also follow the show on social media at Calder Farmstead on Twitter, at the Calder Farmstead on Instagram, and on Facebook. Links to all of that and more can be found on our link tree, which is scrolling below on YouTube, but is also linktr.ee/the Calder Farmstead. Once again, that's linktr.ee/the Calder Farmstead.
Yes, and my name is CC Hawkley. As I mentioned, you can find me representing Full Press Hockey on Twitter at FPC_AHL. And you can also find me talking about hockey on my personal Twitter account, amongst other things like football and music, etc. But my personal Twitter account at CCHawk, that's SEESEEHAWK. And you can check out my writing on the Full Press Coverage Network at www.fullpresshockey.com. Sean.
I'm Sean O'Brien. You can follow me on Twitter at Sean O'Brien81. That's SEANOBRIEN81. I'm also on Instagram at Sean O'Brien_81. You can find my stats work on Tableau. at bit.ly/datadump-and-chase. All lowercase, all one word.
Hey, and thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to us. Y'all keep your stick on the ice.